Welcome to The Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly live show where we read out and cover some of the biggest news stories of the week and do some analysis. My name is Cory Morgan. I'm one of the columnists and the digital editor. Sitting today with Dave Naylor, our news editor, and our Fildebrandt. And as usual, we've got a lot of good stuff to cover today. It's been a lively news week. I'll go in reverse order to where we want to start. Erin O'Toole seems to have worked up the West again with some comments about Energy East we should be discussing. Jason Kenney's having a terrible time in the polls. He seems not to be winning Alberta's love this week. Mayor Naheed Nenshi has some serious competition for his job in City Hall as Jeromy Farkas has announced that he's going to make a mayoral run. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Jeromy Farkas becomes the first candidate in the running for the 2000 election, civic election. It's more than a year away. It's not going to a year October, but Farkas threw his hat into the ring, and it will certainly stir up local politics. Now Farkas is in. The question turns to the current mayor, Naheed Nenshi, who has held the office since 2010. Nobody knows whether he's going to run or not. And the question is, will Farkas well know the two guys have an intense dislike for each other, basically. So will Mayor Nenshi want to finish and go riding off into the sunset, knowing that if Farkas does get elected, he may tear down some of Nenshi's stuff that he's been doing over the last 10 years.
We have no volume from Dave.
Farkas announced in a 6-minute video, which you can find on our website at the Western Standard, talked about his family moving from Hungary, 1956, escaping the communists in Dover, and how he grew up as a Forest Lawn kid, much like Mayor Nenshi.
I'm sorry,
and,
Cory, can you hear anything?
Talked about becoming elected as a councillor, and how he angered his colleagues right away by turning down what he called the golden pension. And he's being basically a lone voice on. He's the only one that seems to be interested in fiscal constraint and keeping tax levels as low as possible. So, Cory, it's a fun election anyways.
Certainly that. Derek, you got something to add on this run coming up?
Well, he'll certainly. I think this is probably the only kind of candidate that will beat Nenshi. The last time they had, I think, a guy named Bill Smith, very traditional, button-down establishment Tory, and really, and he got. Nenshi was re-elected by one of the smallest margins in quite a few decades, actually, since the 80s. Calgary, no sitting Calgary mayor has ever been defeated in an election, though, since Ralph Klein defeated the incumbent to become mayor in the earlier 80s. So it's a big task to take out a Calgary mayor. They have a pretty good re-election chance as incumbents. Farkas, though, is in his, I think, 3 years so far on council, has really set himself up as essentially the leader of the opposition on the council. He's consistently challenged and been a pain in the butt for the mayor. He's led the minority conservative faction on the council, and I think made that faction more conservative. I think splitting, taking a more consistently conservative or libertarian approach on the council. Kind of exposing some of the conservative and name-only guys who are sitting on there, some of which are even retiring this year. But, he's young. He hails from the Wild Rose. He is not, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he's more libertarian than a traditional conservative. I think he'll make for a very interesting run. One of the things most people aren't that aware of, though, is that the Tory establishment in Calgary does not like this guy. He is not their guy. He, I think, is considered a relatively independent individual. while he is aligned with the UCP and CPC, the establishments in those two parties have been kind of searching for their own candidate, wanting someone probably a bit more pliable, someone who's not going to be their own power base that can challenge them if there's a disagreement. That candidate might still emerge, but I think they've been afraid of having someone else, because Farkas, it's been pretty clear for a while, I think, that he's going to run for mayor. And now, if they put up someone else against him, they'll be accused of splitting the vote, very ironically. So I think he's got a very strong chance. They need to have a candidate who is dynamic and aggressive and not just campaigning on being a different guy than Nenshi, as they did with Bill Smith last time. But Farkas, he does have a reputation for maybe not getting along with council too well. But I think that's a good thing, considering how well this council has done.
Well, it does position him as the non-establishment candidate. As you're saying, the old guard is kind of looking for somebody they'd like, who they could mold or control. And Mayor of Calgary and Jeromy over this last 3 years to try and knock him into line, and he's just absolutely refused to. He just digs his heels in further. So personally, I like seeing somebody shake it up, and he's coming at it smart, as you said. Now he's the one who's jumped out, so somebody else jumping in is going to have to justify why they're running and potentially giving the head Nenshi another term, because if that vote gets split, that could happen. As well, Jeromy knows. I mean, he unseated essentially Brian Pincott, who was an established councillor who'd been in Calgary. Pincott did end up not running in the end, but Jeromy had spent 2 years of door knocking, nipping on his heels, and I think Brian knew he wasn't going to win it, so he just got while the getting was good. And that'll be interesting to see too, is whether Mayor Nenshi wants to take the gamble and possibly lose in an election, or just say that he's going to resign with his dignity and move on.
If I was Nenshi, I would wait to see if the Tory establishment mounts its own direct candidate. They might just figure that, well, Farkas has got a pretty good chance of winning, and if they put another guy against them, that'll just split the vote and keep Nenshi. So maybe they will keep their candidate out of the race. But if I was Nenshi, I would before announcing a decision one way or another, I would wait to see if there are going to be, if there's going to be an establishment Tory in the race. If so, if there's two candidates, then he's got a shot of coming up the middle and taking it. But if he's facing essentially a clean race with Farkas as the only major candidate to his right, I think Nenshi would be probably well advised to call Justin Trudeau for a Senate appointment.
Yeah, well, and it's going to make for, there's enough fireworks already, but the council this year now, with it being an election year and those two jousting for position, at least from an observer point of view, it's going to be quite fun to watch, if nothing else. So getting on to speaking of Tory establishment, we've got Erin O'Toole seems to have kind of worked up the West after sitting down and chatting with the Quebec Premier. Some people are saying it was taken out of context. Others are saying that's what he meant. Perhaps, Dave, we could expand on what's been kind of making ripples out of that.
Reminds me, Cory, of that Monty Python sketch.
Bringing out their dead, and
one guy
sits up, I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet.
And that's the energy pipeline. TC Energy pulled the plug on this back in 2017 after opposition
from Quebec and
environmental groups and the federal government putting up various roadblocks to being constructed. And Erin O'Toole, new leader of the Tory party, met with the Quebec Premier this week.
It was his first meeting with a provincial premier, and he wanted the Quebec premier. And they talked about pipelines. O'Toole talking about the economic necessity of them, and Francois Legault basically saying, not on my watch. So O'Toole came out of the meeting, basically said pipelines are important, but Energy East is dead. That prompted Jason Kenney yesterday to basically say, no, not dead yet. I'm not willing to give it the last rites. He says he and the Alberta government are still committed to getting Alberta oil to Canadian Tidewater, and in his opinion, the project could still go ahead. How? Not a clue, Derek.
Yeah, we received, one angry email from someone just ranting, saying, "Oh, you've taken his comments that Energy East is off the table out of context." I just responded, said, "Please explain the context for me," and he just said no. I think some people are taking this out of context. Rachel Notley is taking it out of context. Big surprise. She said that Erin O'Toole has killed Energy East. Well, I don't think that the leader of the opposition has the ability to kill something with a word like this. I don't think so. But it's actually been dead for some time. Energy East was killed by Justin Trudeau and Rachel Notley. And I think it was Francois Legault years ago. It's been dead for years. It's not almost dead. It would require Lazarus to bring. It would require a Lazarus moment for this thing to come back. It's completely dead. It's off the table. It's not under real consideration right now. It's been dead for a long time because of political pressure from the Quebec Premier, from the federal Prime Minister, and from the then Premier of Alberta, who said absolutely nothing about it at the time. That being said, I think this is O'Toole's way. O'Toole has, when he was running for leader, has been pretty clear. He's pro-pipeline, pro-energy, all of these things. But he's also said that he won't force pipelines through provinces. Well, that's kind of the point of having a federal government, is that there should be a federal government to do national things like infrastructure and trade across provincial boundaries, and provinces to do things directly. And if the federal government can't do that, there is no point of having a federal government. There is no point of having an Ottawa if it can't enforce national economic union. That's the whole point of the damn thing. But Erin O'Toole said he's not going to force it on provinces. And after meeting with Francois Legault, Premier of Quebec, he said that Legault says no, so I guess it's off the table. Now, this isn't his way of saying, this wasn't Erin O'Toole saying that he has taken it off the table, but that if Quebec says it's off the table, then it's just not going to go anywhere. But those comments have been met with quite a backlash in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. A lot of people obviously not very pleased about it, and saying that it pretends to the inevitability of now of the Conservatives taking the West for granted and focusing on winning votes in Ontario and Quebec.
Well, yeah, and as an Albertan myself, that infuriates me. It's the same old thing. So they are taking us for granted and potentially throwing us under the bus in order to win Ontario and Quebec, which, the way Confederation works, that's the only way you are going to get a majority government. And perhaps it's not Energy East in particular, but what if there's another pipeline down the road? I mean, we really do want to get a pipeline to Tidewater in the east, or we've always wanted to. But if it turns out that call is up to the Quebec Premier of the time at any given time, again, well, what's the point of Confederation? I'd rather negotiate as a national leader to national leader with Quebec than to have some milquetoast federal Tory giving us lip service and then just capitulating to Quebec whenever they get their back up and then not. That's me. That's been me for quite some time. So somebody else who's having a heck of a hard time too, though, winning Albertans' hearts, is our premier right now. That poll that came out, the latest one, and this wasn't just Jason Kenney's approval numbers as we saw recently. These are the party numbers. These are who would you vote for tomorrow if an election was held. And it has Jason Kenney and Rachel Notley neck and neck, along with surprising numbers of where his support's draining.
Yeah, Cory, it takes a lot to shock me, but when I saw the results of this Leger poll, I was shocked. Tory popularity in Alberta has plummeted. They are now tied with the NDP at 38%. After having a 17, 18, 19-point lead just a few months ago. Shockingly to me, the NDP is even ahead in Calgary. They're way ahead in Edmonton, but that's what you would expect. But the NDP is actually currently leading the UCP in Calgary. The only places that the UCP are actually doing fairly well is in the rural areas. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're a long way from an election, but Derek, these numbers have to be a wake-up call for Kenney.
Yeah, it's they should be extremely alarming. 38% tie. It depends. The NDP vote is not very efficient. It's heavily concentrated in Edmonton, and then within Calgary, it's heavily concentrated downtown. So I'm not convinced that the NDP could necessarily pull out government from this, but it would certainly the UCP would lose a ton of seats. You know, they got 55% of the vote in the provincial election. That is a massive, massive landslide. That means they're down 17 points of the general voters. That is hemorrhaging. They've lost a third or more of their vote right now. I actually think they might be lower than this, though, because this is a bizarre poll. It asked only 5 options. It asked United Conservative, NDP, Alberta Party, Alberta Independence Party, and then Other Party. Now, normally, a good pollster, when Other Party gets above 2 or 3%, because there's normally not, you know, those normally are for very small fringe parties. If Other gets above 2 or 3%, they normally ask, you know, they try to figure out what is that Other. Well, Other is 8% here. 8%. You got Alberta Party 9, Alberta Independence Party 7, and Other Party is 8. 8 is pretty damn big. The 8% of the vote normally gets you 4 seats in an election, 3 or 4 seats in an election in Alberta. That's 3 or 4 seats that the pollsters aren't even trying to figure out. So is that the Liberals? Is that the Wild Rose Independence Party? And normally, if you have just Other listed, and people would otherwise want Other, they still won't even press Other when they get the phone call for the poll. They'll just go with their next favorite. So if you're, say, a Wild Rose Independence Party supporter, and they don't even list the Wild Rose Independence Party, chances are you'll probably just say UCP because whatever, that's the only thing they're giving on the poll that's even vaguely in your area. Or if you're a Liberal supporter, and Liberal isn't even listed as an option, you might just hit NDP because that's the only thing that's listed there. So they don't list the Liberal Party, so that's probably inflating the NDP numbers a bit here. The Liberal Party normally does 6 to 8% in polls. They just don't have enough candidates to actually capture those votes in elections, but at least in polls, they're normally 6 to 8% right now. They also don't have Wild Rose Independence Party, which we had at, I believe, 10% when we polled on this a few months ago before that party was even created. I would suspect it's higher now with a leader and actually having then gotten a little bit of profile. So chances are the UCP numbers and the NDP numbers are both smaller than what this poll is showing. So I'm going to try and scrounge up, if anybody listening right now would like to see a good poll listing a lot more options, please consider going to westernstandardonline.com, make a donation, and you can attach just a little note to it that's supposed to go towards getting a poll done. Western Standard wants to get a good quality poll done on this with more options and get a really more accurate lay of the land on here. But either way, this does show the continuing trend that UCP support is steadily and surely eroding from where it was in the last election. But I know I've talked to people in that caucus, and they get presented with polls. And it was the same thing when I was in the Wild Rose. The leadership of the party present you with polls, and they're always far better than what is in the public. Because what you want to do is keep your caucus happy, make sure they're not worried or thinking about doing something crazy with the leader. And so the UCP caucus is being told, similarly I was told in Wild Rose, everything is fine, don't believe these polls, we're doing great, the premier's loved, the party's popular, don't worry about anything. The rookies are probably more likely to believe that than the older guys, but you know, low polls do tend to affect the way parties govern, and this is going to start to affect the Tories at some point, what they're doing.
Well, they got to start looking at where they're bleeding. I mean, as you said, with those 2 polls, something that's been interesting is the independence option. People aren't even necessarily voting for a party; they're just voting for any party that's presenting that. I mean, the Alberta Independence Party, again, to be blunt, has been in basically disarray and you know, unseen. I mean, they're trying. There's a few individuals making noises on social media, and I imagine they're trying to do some ground organization. The Wild Rose Independence Party now has jumped onto the scene, but they're still, of course, just getting rolling. Paul Hinman's been out pounding the pavement and doing a lot of meetings with people as much as he can. But I just would look at that and think that at least a good 10-12% of what's bleeding from the UCP is towards regionalist and independence-leaning parties. Is, you know, when Kenney's appearing to capitulate to Ottawa on his soft sell over there, Albertans are getting tired of it. Is he going to start finally digging his heels in, not just commissioning more reports that just seem to drag on, and actually start standing up for us?
Derek, do you think Rachel Notley's sitting there rubbing You're saying this is the start of vote splitting on the right wing, and we're going to get up, we're going to go through the middle and become government again next election?
Possibly. I mean, she's sticking around for a reason. Either she thinks she could be premier again, or it's a pretty good job. You know, the NDP is never really expected to win outside of BC. So, you know, she can continue, leader of the opposition, pretty good salary, it's public respectability, it's not a bad job. The numbers don't really show, though, that there is really any path to victory for the NDP. When they won in 2015, it was very much an anomaly. There were people in rural Alberta who voted for them not because they were socialists, but because they wanted to get rid of the old Tories, and the Wildrose had been too damaged from the floor crossing of just a few months earlier. And Brian Jean had been on the job for about 1 week. So the NDP's support is highly, highly concentrated in Edmonton. With these kinds of numbers, the NDP would win back every single seat in Edmonton, including the one single Tory seat within the city proper. They would probably win some of the surrounding constituencies outside of Edmonton proper, but in the greater area, the Sherwood Parks, St. Albert's, things like that. And they would probably win, you know, a reasonable handful of seats, beginning in the center of Calgary, where they've got 3 seats, and growing outwards, and in northeast Calgary. That, in a best-case scenario for the NDP, could get them to a plurality, the most seats, but not a majority. And having Andrew Scheer was lying to people when he said the party with the most seats gets to be the government. That's not true. He knew it was not true. Anyone who understands our system knows that's not true. The party that commands the confidence of the House is the government. And so if there was, you know, something, unless, say, the Liberals bizarrely held the balance of power, it's highly unlikely that any of the smaller parties in Alberta, which are primarily found on the right, it's highly, highly unlikely that any of them would ever support an NDP government. The NDP have to win a majority to be government in Alberta. A minority, I don't think they have a real possibility of ever being a minority government. And the numbers just show they've got no support in rural Alberta. They are just dead there. They salted the earth with Bill 6 and carbon taxes and things like that. They really have only room to grow in Calgary, and even then, I don't think it gets them to a majority without a single seat in rural Alberta. But either way, it is still good news for the NDP. They do pick up seats. There is the possibility of depriving the UCP of their majority. But leftists should be very careful about what they wish for, because if there is a minority government led by the Tories are forced into a minority, and the balance of power is held by something like the new Wildrose, that government would probably be an awful lot more to the right than the current Tories are right now. Just as Trudeau is more to the left than minority government, relying on the federal NDP, than he is as a majority.
Yeah, well, and Albertans are pretty volatile, and to be blunt, I think crabby right now. So somebody better inspire them pretty soon, or we're really going to see these polls, I think, bounce around as they look for somebody who they feel is going to represent them and stand up for them. Because I can't look out there and feel really inspired with a whole bunch. I mean, I know where I'd vote today, but nobody's really got me excited, and that's troublesome. I'm usually a pretty partisan person. So what else have we got to look forward to in this week? Anything outstanding or breaking, Dave?
Well, obviously next week's going to be the big one with the return to Parliament. There's going to be an economic update by the Trudeau government, followed by each. Everybody out west is focused on reports of a second carbon tax that will be announced in the throne speech. That's going to raise the cost of living for all of us, from groceries to the price of gas at the neighborhood station. And once that is announced, there will be a vote in the House, and if it's not passed, the government will collapse. And at this point next week, we could be having an election. All depends on where, I guess, the NDP and the Bloc are going to throw their lot in. So lots to consider in the coming days, Cory.
You watch the part. I was checking here to go into an election quite yet. The NDP aren't looking too well poised federally, but again, this is the most bizarre year we've all lived through, so I'm not ruling anything out at this point.
And nobody knows. Canadians do not want to go to the polls during COVID. Repeated polls have shown that. But out here we've got John Horgan considering going to the polls too, and trying to get a majority government there. So yeah, it's crazy times, and I'm not sure. Does anybody know what's going through Justin Trudeau's mind? I don't think so.
I'm not sure if there's anything going through his mind.
Exactly. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, well, I'll hand it off to you to close it off, Derek. Maybe remind people of where they can subscribe so we can keep them up to date and let them know what's in there.
Yeah, well, we're now consistently doing a broadcast on every Wednesday, normally around 12:30, and we're trying to expand our operations with the Western Standard. But we need people out there like you to support what we're doing. We are one of the very few media organizations in Canada that refuses to accept any government funding whatsoever. When the government brings in their licensing, we're going to tell them where to stick it, and we are going to refuse to be licensed by the government in any way. And there's very few media outlets in Canada that do so, and we're the only one at all focused completely on the West. Everything between Victoria and Winnipeg. Anything beyond that is here be dragons to us. So we're owned and operated and staffed entirely by the West here. We need you to become a supporter of us if you're not already. So go to westernstandardonline.com and click on membership. For $5, $10, or $20 a month, you can help to support independent Western media. As I always say, if you don't support us, eventually you're just going to have to go back to watching the CBC. So please try to do your part. Things are tight, but nothing's free here, and we're doing our best to provide you with independent media for Western Canadians, providing you with a very different perspective than what you're getting from most of our competitors. So thank you all very much for watching. Cory and Dave, thanks for coming on today. And we'll probably be back soon. We're going to probably start doing more episodes, one-off interviews with people throughout the week. But thank you very much. God bless.